The opulent mansion of the Fernandez family stood like a gleaming fortress against the backdrop of the setting sun. Its manicured lawns and pristine fountains were a testament to the wealth and power of its owner, Mr. Alejandro Fernandez, one of the most influential business tycoons in the country. But within its gilded walls, a storm was brewing. Lucia Fernandez, the only daughter of the millionaire, paced her lavish bedroom, her heart heavy with despair. At 25, she was a vision of beauty. Long, raven hair cascading down her back, olive skin glowing even in her distress, and eyes that sparkled like emeralds. But today, those eyes were brimming with unshed tears. "I won't do it, Papa." Lucia's voice trembled as she faced her father, a man whose very presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure. "I won't marry a man I've never met." Alejandro Fernandez, a silver-haired man with a steel gaze, looked at his daughter with a mixture of frustration and determination. "Lucia, my dear, you must understand. This marriage is not just about you. It's about securing our family's future, our legacy." Lucia turned away, her fingers clutching the delicate pearl necklace at her throat, a family heirloom that now felt more like a chain. "But Papa, how can you expect me to spend my life with a stranger? What about love? What about my dreams?" Her father's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Love? Dreams? Lucia, wake up. In our world, marriages are alliances, not fairy tales. David Montero is from a powerful family. This union will double our influence, secure contracts worth billions. Can't you see the bigger picture?" As Lucia opened her mouth to protest, a gentle knock interrupted them. Sophia, the family's longtime housekeeper, entered the room, her kind eyes taking in the tense scene before her. "Mr. Fernandez, the tailor has arrived for Miss Lucia's final fitting." Alejandro nodded curtly. "Perfect timing. Lucia, we'll continue this discussion later. For now, focus on looking your best for the engagement party tomorrow night." With that, he strode out of the room, leaving Lucia feeling more trapped than ever. Sophia approached her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Oh, my dear child," she murmured, her voice laced with sympathy. Lucia collapsed into Sophia's arms, finally allowing her tears to fall. "Sophia, what am I going to do? I can't marry him. I don't even know him." The older woman stroked Lucia's hair, a gesture she had done countless times since Lucia was a little girl. "Hush now, mija. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Who knows, this David might surprise you." But Lucia shook her head vehemently. "No, Sophia, I can't shake this feeling of dread. There's something not right about all of this." As Sophia helped Lucia prepare for the fitting, neither of them noticed the shadow that passed by the partially open door, a figure that had been listening intently to their conversation. In his study, Alejandro Fernandez poured himself a generous glass of whiskey, his hand trembling slightly as he brought it to his lips. The portrait of his late wife, Elena, seemed to watch him accusingly from above the fireplace. "I'm doing this for us, for our family," he muttered, as if trying to convince the painting. But the guilt gnawing at his insides told a different story. He walked over to his desk, unlocking a hidden drawer with a key he kept on a chain around his neck. From it, he pulled out an old, weathered envelope. His fingers traced the faded handwriting on its surface before he hastily shoved it back, locking the drawer with a decisive click. "No one can ever know," he whispered to the empty room. "No one." Meanwhile, in a luxurious hotel suite across town, David Montero stood by the window, his piercing blue eyes scanning the city skyline. At 30, he cut an impressive figure, tall, with broad shoulders and a chiseled jawline that graced many a business magazine cover. But today, his handsome features were marred by a frown. His phone buzzed, displaying a message that made his frown deepen. "It's done," the text read. "The engagement party is tomorrow night. Remember the plan." David's grip on the phone tightened. "I remember," he muttered to himself. "I've been waiting for this moment my entire life." He walked over to his suitcase, pulling out a small, ornate box. Inside lay a locket, tarnished with age. He opened it, revealing a photo of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Lucia Fernandez. "I'm coming, Mama," he whispered. "I'll make things right." As night fell over the city, 3 souls lay awake, each tormented by their own secrets. Lucia, tears staining her pillow, dreamed of escape. Alejandro, in his study, drowned his guilt in expensive liquor. And David, in his hotel room, plotted a revenge years in the making. Little did they know that fate had a twist in store that would shatter their worlds and unearth long-buried truths. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Lucia's heart. As her team of stylists fussed over her, preparing her for the engagement party, she felt like a lamb being dressed for slaughter. "Miss Lucia, you look absolutely stunning," exclaimed Mariana, her personal stylist, as she put the finishing touches on Lucia's makeup. Lucia gazed at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was indeed beautiful, dressed in a shimmering gold gown that hugged her curves before flowing out in a cascade of fabric. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant updo, adorned with glittering diamond pins. But her eyes told a different story. "Thank you, Mariana," Lucia replied softly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As the stylists filed out of the room, Sophia entered, carrying a small velvet box. "Your father asked me to bring you this," she said, her voice tinged with concern. Lucia opened the box to find a pair of exquisite diamond earrings. A note inside read, "For my beautiful daughter on her special day. Papa." She closed the box with a snap, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. "Special day," she muttered bitterly. "More like the day I lose my freedom." Sophia sat beside her, taking Lucia's hands in her own. "Lucia, my dear, I've watched you grow from a little girl into this amazing woman. You have a strength inside you that you don't even realize. Whatever happens tonight, remember who you are." Lucia squeezed Sophia's hands, drawing comfort from the woman who had been more of a mother to her than anyone else. "I'm scared, Sophia. What if I can't go through with this?" Sophia's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. "Then you don't. You are Lucia Fernandez. You make your own choices." For the first time in days, Lucia felt a glimmer of hope. She hugged Sophia tightly, whispering, "Thank you for everything." As Sophia left to help with the final party preparations, Lucia's resolve strengthened. She may be forced to attend this engagement party, but she would not be a passive participant in the rest of her life. Downstairs, the Fernandez mansion was transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom in soft light, while floral arrangements of white roses and orchids adorned every surface. The city's elite had begun to arrive, their expensive cars lining the circular driveway. Alejandro Fernandez stood at the foot of the grand staircase, greeting guests with practiced charm. But his eyes kept darting to the top of the stairs, waiting for Lucia's appearance. "Alejandro, old friend," boomed a voice. Roberto Montero, David's father, approached with a glass of champagne in hand. "Where's that beautiful daughter of yours? And my son, for that matter?" Alejandro's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ah, Roberto, Lucia will be down shortly. And David, well, I'm sure he'll make quite the entrance." As if on cue, a murmur rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to the grand entrance where David Montero stood, looking every inch the dashing businessman in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. Alejandro's eyes narrowed as he watched David work the room, shaking hands and flashing charismatic smiles. There was something about the young man that set him on edge, a nagging feeling he couldn't quite place. Suddenly, the ballroom fell silent. Lucia appeared at the top of the stairs, a vision in gold. As she descended, her eyes locked with David's for the first time. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Lucia felt a jolt of something. Not attraction, not quite, but a strange sense of familiarity. David, for his part, faltered for a split second, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before he regained his composure. As Lucia reached the bottom of the stairs, David stepped forward, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in a gentle kiss. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Lucia," he said, his voice low and smooth. Lucia managed a small nod, her heart racing. This was the man she was supposed to marry, yet something felt off. The way he looked at her, it wasn't the look of a man meeting his future wife. There was an intensity in his gaze that spoke of hidden depths and unspoken truths. Alejandro clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present my daughter, Lucia Fernandez, and her fiancé, David Montero." The room erupted in applause, but Lucia barely heard it. Her mind was whirling with questions and doubts. Who was this man really? And why did she have the unsettling feeling that this engagement was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change everything? As David led her to the center of the ballroom for their first dance, Lucia made a silent vow. She would get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter the cost. Little did she know, the answers she sought were closer, and more shocking, than she could ever imagine. The music swelled, and as David's arm encircled her waist, Lucia steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. The dance was about to begin, both on and off the ballroom floor. The grand ballroom spun in a whirl of light and color as David guided Lucia through their first dance. His hand on her waist felt alien, uncomfortable, yet there was something in his touch that spoke of hesitation, almost reluctance. As they moved across the floor, their eyes met, and Lucia saw a flicker of, was it recognition? Guilt? Whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a carefully neutral expression. "You dance beautifully," David murmured, his voice low enough for only Lucia to hear. "Thank you," she replied stiffly. "You're not so bad yourself." A ghost of a smile played on David's lips. "I sense you're not exactly thrilled about this arrangement." Lucia's eyes flashed with defiance. "What gave it away? The fact that I'm being forced to marry a complete stranger?" For a moment, David's composure slipped, and Lucia caught a glimpse of genuine emotion in his eyes, a mixture of pain and determination that puzzled her. But before she could ponder it further, the music ended, and they were swept into a sea of well-wishers and congratulations. As the night wore on, Lucia found herself constantly searching for David in the crowd. Despite her initial aversion, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. She watched as he charmed guests with easy smiles and witty conversation, yet there was a tension in his shoulders, a wariness in his gaze that spoke volumes. Taking advantage of a moment when David was engrossed in conversation with some business associates, Lucia slipped away from the party. She needed air, space to think. Her feet carried her to her father's study, a room that had always been off-limits to her. The door was ajar, and voices drifted out, her father's and Roberto Montero's. Lucia pressed herself against the wall, listening intently. "Alejandro, old friend," Roberto was saying, his voice slurred with alcohol, "I must say, I had my doubts about this arrangement, but seeing our children together, it's perfect. The merger of our companies will be unstoppable." Lucia's heart sank. So that was it. She was nothing more than a pawn in her father's business game. Yes, Alejandro replied, sounding distracted. "Roberto, there's something I need to tell you about David." But at that moment, a hand closed around Lucia's arm, pulling her away from the door. She whirled around, coming face to face with David. "Eavesdropping, Lucia?" he whispered, his eyes boring into hers. "Careful, you might hear something you're not supposed to." Lucia wrenched her arm free. "What are you hiding?" she hissed. "And don't try to deny it. I can see it in your eyes. You're here for more than just this sham of a marriage." For a long moment, David said nothing, simply staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "You're right. But trust me, Lucia, the less you know, the safer you'll be." With that cryptic warning, he turned and walked away, leaving Lucia more confused and intrigued than ever. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Lucia felt like a puppet, being pulled this way and that by wedding planners, designers, and her increasingly agitated father. Alejandro seemed on edge, snapping at servants and spending long hours locked in his study. It was during one of these planning sessions that Lucia's world tilted on its axis. She was being fitted for her wedding dress, a monstrosity of lace and pearls that she privately thought looked like a decorated cake, when Sophia burst into the room, her face pale. "Miss Lucia," she gasped, "come quickly. There's been an accident." Lucia's heart plummeted. What happened?" But Sophia just shook her head, tears in her eyes. "It's your father. He collapsed in his study. The doctors are with him now." The world seemed to slow down as Lucia raced through the mansion, her half-pinned wedding dress trailing behind her. She burst into her father's bedroom, where a team of doctors huddled around the bed. Alejandro lay there, his face ashen, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Lucia had ever seen him. When he saw her, he weakly raised a hand. "Lucia," he wheezed, "my darling girl. Come here." She approached the bed, taking his hand in hers. Despite everything, despite the anger and resentment she'd been harboring, seeing her father like this broke something inside her. "Papa," she whispered, "what happened?" Alejandro's eyes darted around the room before settling on her face. "Lucia, listen to me. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago." But before he could continue, he was seized by a violent coughing fit. The doctors quickly ushered Lucia out of the room, despite her protests. Hours passed like years as Lucia paced the hallway outside her father's room. David arrived at some point, his face a mask of concern that Lucia couldn't quite believe was genuine. "Any news?" he asked softly. Lucia shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. "Nothing. They won't tell me anything." David hesitated for a moment before placing a hand on her shoulder. The gesture was awkward, as if he wasn't used to offering comfort, but Lucia found herself leaning into his touch nonetheless. "Lucia," David began, his voice strained, "there's something I need to." But at that moment, the door to Alejandro's room opened, and the head doctor emerged, his face grave. "Miss Fernandez," he said solemnly, "your father is asking for you. And, for Mr. Montero as well." Exchanging puzzled glances, Lucia and David entered the dimly lit room. Alejandro lay propped up on pillows, looking frail and ancient. When he saw them, a look of relief washed over his face. "My children," he said softly, then seemed to catch himself. "Lucia, David, come closer." As they approached the bed, Lucia noticed her father clutching something in his hand, an old, weathered envelope. "Papa," Lucia began, but Alejandro held up a hand to silence her. "Please, let me speak while I still have the strength," he said. "What I'm about to tell you, it will change everything. But you must know the truth." With trembling hands, he held out the envelope to Lucia. "Open it," he instructed. Lucia did as she was told, pulling out a yellowed photograph and a handwritten letter. As she stared at the photo, her breath caught in her throat. It showed a younger version of her father, standing next to a woman who looked startlingly like Lucia herself. In the woman's arms was a baby, and beside her stood a young boy of about 5. "I don't understand," Lucia whispered, looking from the photo to her father. Alejandro's eyes filled with tears. "That woman is your mother, Elena. And the children are you and David." The room fell silent, the only sound the steady beep of the heart monitor. Lucia felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. She turned to David, seeing her own shock mirrored in his face. "What are you saying?" David demanded, his voice hoarse. Alejandro closed his eyes, as if the weight of his secrets was physically crushing him. "David is not just your fiancé, Lucia. He's your brother. Your older brother, separated from us when he was just a boy." The revelation hit Lucia like a physical blow. She staggered back, her mind reeling. David, her brother? The man she was supposed to marry was her own flesh and blood? David's face had gone chalk white. "You knew?" he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "All this time, you knew who I was?" Alejandro nodded weakly. "I discovered the truth shortly after the engagement was arranged. I couldn't bring myself to stop it. The merger, the power it would bring. I convinced myself it was for the best." Lucia felt bile rising in her throat. The room was spinning, the walls closing in. Without a word, she turned and fled, ignoring the calls of her name behind her. She ran through the mansion, past startled servants and concerned guests, out into the gardens where she and her mother used to spend hours playing when she was a child. There, beneath the old oak tree, Lucia fell to her knees and emptied the contents of her stomach onto the manicured lawn. How long she stayed there, she couldn't say. The world had tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about herself and her family shattering into a million pieces. She was vaguely aware of someone approaching, sitting down beside her on the grass. Quite a bombshell, huh? David's voice was raw, laced with a myriad of emotions Lucia couldn't begin to untangle. She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time. Now that she knew the truth, she could see the resemblance. They had the same eyes, the same curve of the jaw. How had she not seen it before? Did you know? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David shook his head, running a hand through his hair. Not entirely. I knew there was some connection between us, between our families. But this? He laughed bitterly. This I didn't see coming. Lucia's mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of this new reality. But, how? Why were we separated? Why didn't I know I had a brother? David's expression darkened. That, dear sister, is a story 25 years in the making. And I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface of our father's secrets. As if on cue, Sophia appeared at the edge of the garden, her face etched with concern. Miss Lucia, Mr. David, your father. He's asking for you both. Exchanging a look that spoke volumes, Lucia and David rose to their feet. Whatever lay ahead, whatever truths were yet to be uncovered, they would face it together. As they walked back towards the mansion, Lucia felt David's hand slip into hers, a gesture of solidarity that brought unexpected comfort. The engagement party guests had long since departed, leaving the mansion eerily quiet. As they approached Alejandro's room, Lucia could hear hushed voices, her father's, weak but urgent, and another she didn't recognize. David tensed beside her. That's Roberto Montero, he whispered. My adoptive father. They paused outside the door, listening. Can't tell them everything, Alejandro, Roberto was saying, his voice strained. It would destroy them, destroy everything we've built. They deserve to know the truth, Alejandro replied, his voice barely audible. I've lived with this guilt for too long. Unable to wait any longer, Lucia pushed open the door. The scene before her was surreal, her father, pale and frail in his bed, and Roberto Montero, looking as if he'd aged a decade in the past few hours. Lucia, David, Alejandro said, attempting to sit up straighter. There's so much I need to tell you. So much you need to understand. But before he could continue, alarms began blaring. Alejandro's body went rigid, his eyes rolling back in his head. In an instant, the room was flooded with medical staff, pushing Lucia and David aside as they worked to stabilize their father. In the chaos that followed, Lucia found herself in the hallway once more, her head spinning. David stood beside her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. We need answers, he said, his voice low and determined. And I think I know where to start looking. Lucia raised an eyebrow. Where? David's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The old summer house. The one where. He hesitated, the words still foreign on his tongue, where our mother died. A chill ran down Lucia's spine. The summer house had been abandoned for as long as she could remember, a place her father refused to speak of or visit. She had always sensed there were secrets hidden within its walls, but never in her wildest dreams could she have imagined the truth that was now unfolding. When do we leave? She asked, surprising herself with her own determination. A ghost of a smile flickered across David's face. Now, before anyone can stop us. As they slipped out of the mansion, the weight of their shared history pressing down upon them, Lucia couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something much bigger and more dangerous than either of them could have anticipated. The truth about their family, about their very identities, lay waiting to be uncovered. And something told her that once that Pandora's box was opened, there would be no going back. The drive to the summer house was tense, filled with a silence heavy with unasked questions and unspoken fears. Lucia watched the familiar cityscape give way to rolling countryside, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Beside her, David gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his jaw clenched in concentration or anxiety, perhaps both. As the old house came into view, Lucia felt a shiver run down her spine. It stood like a sentinel against the darkening sky, its once grand facade now weathered and imposing. Vines crept up its walls, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. "I remember this place," David said softly as they pulled up to the rusted gates. "Bits and pieces, like fragments of a dream. I remember laughter, and then screams." Lucia reached out, placing a hand on his arm. It was a strange feeling, this newfound connection with a man who, just days ago, had been a stranger she was meant to marry. Now, he was her brother, a living link to a past she'd never known she had. They made their way up the overgrown path to the front door. Years of neglect had taken their toll, and the lock gave way easily under David's determined assault. As the door creaked open, musty air rushed out to greet them, carrying with it the ghosts of summers long past. Inside, sheets draped over furniture created eerie, misshapen silhouettes in the fading light. Lucia fumbled for a light switch, but of course, there was no power. David produced a flashlight from his pocket, its beam cutting through the gloom like a knife. "Where do we start?" Lucia whispered, suddenly feeling very small in this house of secrets. David's eyes scanned the room, settling on a door at the far end. "Father's study. If there are answers to be found, they'll be there." The study was a time capsule, frozen in the moment it had last been used. Dust-covered papers littered the massive oak desk, and bookshelves lined the walls, their contents hidden behind clouded glass doors. But it was the painting above the fireplace that drew their attention, a family portrait, vibrant and alive amidst the decay that surrounded it. Lucia approached it, her heart pounding. There they were, her father, younger and smiling. The woman she now knew to be her mother, radiant and beautiful. A young boy with familiar eyes. And in her mother's arms, a baby swaddled in white. "That's us," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "The family we should have been." As Lucia reached out to touch the canvas, her fingers brushed against something hard beneath the frame. Frowning, she felt along the edge until she found a small latch. With a soft click, the painting swung forward, revealing a hidden safe behind it. "Clever, Papa," Lucia murmured. "Always hiding your secrets in plain sight." David stepped forward, examining the safe. "It's an old model. I think I can crack it." Lucia watched in amazement as David worked, his ear pressed against the safe as he slowly turned the dial. Minutes ticked by, the only sound the soft clicks of the mechanism. Finally, with a satisfying thunk, the safe door swung open. Inside was a treasure trove of secrets, stacks of documents, old photographs, and a leather-bound journal that Lucia recognized as her father's. With trembling hands, she reached for the journal, opening it to the first page. "If you're reading this," she read aloud, "then the truth I've worked so hard to bury has finally come to light. My children, my darling Lucia and David, I hope you can forgive me for the choices I've made. But to understand, you must know the whole story, a story that begins long before either of you were born." Lucia's voice faltered, and she looked up at David, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she continued reading. "Your mother, Elena, was the love of my life. We met when we were both young and ambitious, working our way up in the cutthroat world of business. She was brilliant, beautiful, and fiercely independent. I was smitten from the moment I saw her. But our love was complicated by the fact that Elena was already engaged to Roberto Montero. Roberto and I had been friends since childhood, more like brothers than business rivals. When he introduced me to his fiancé, I tried to bury my feelings out of loyalty to him. But Elena and I were drawn to each other like moths to a flame. We tried to resist, but in the end, love won out. Elena broke off her engagement to Roberto, and we were married within months. At first, everything was perfect. Our love was passionate, all-consuming. When David was born, our joy knew no bounds. And 5 years later, when Lucia came along, our family felt complete. But happiness, it seems, is a fragile thing. Roberto never forgave us for what he saw as our betrayal. He bided his time, building his own empire in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on a warm summer night, here in this very house. We were celebrating Elena's birthday. The air was filled with laughter and music. David was chasing fireflies in the garden while Elena cradled baby Lucia. I remember thinking how perfect everything was, how lucky I was. And then, in the blink of an eye, it all fell apart. Roberto arrived unexpectedly, drunk and full of rage. He confronted us, accusing Elena of using him, of never loving him. Things escalated quickly. In the chaos that followed, Elena, she fell down the grand staircase, Lucia still in her arms. The next few hours were a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Elena didn't survive the fall. Lucia, miraculously, was unharmed. But in that moment, as I held my wife's lifeless body, something in me broke. I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Roberto was influential. He could have destroyed everything I had built, everything I wanted to give my children. So we made a deal, sealed in blood and shame. He would adopt David, raise him as his own. In return, he would keep the truth of that night buried forever. I told myself it was for the best. That David would have opportunities with Roberto that I, a widower with a newborn, couldn't provide. That Lucia would be spared the pain of knowing how her mother died. But the truth is, I was a coward. I couldn't bear to look at David and see Elena's eyes staring back at me, a constant reminder of what I had lost. Over the years, I built walls around my heart. I threw myself into my work, expanding our family's empire. I told myself it was all for Lucia, to secure her future. But deep down, I knew I was running from the past, from the guilt that gnawed at my soul. And now, as I write these words, I realize the full weight of my mistakes. I've robbed you both of so much, of each other, of the truth, of the family you deserved. I can only hope that by revealing everything now, I can begin to make amends. My children, there is so much more to tell. About the company, about the secrets that lie buried in its foundations. But those are stories for another time. For now, know this. Everything I have done, no matter how misguided, has been out of love for you both. I hope that one day, you can find it in your hearts to forgive me. With all my love and deepest regrets. Your father, Alejandro Fernandez. As Lucia's voice faded, silence descended upon the study. She looked up from the journal, tears streaming down her face, to find David staring out the window, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. David, she whispered, reaching out to him. He turned, his face a mask of pain and anger. All these years, he said, his voice hoarse. All these years, I thought my real parents didn't want me. That they had abandoned me. Lucia stood, crossing the room to embrace her brother. It felt strange and familiar all at once, this newfound connection. We were both lied to, she said softly. Both victims of choices made long ago. David pulled back, wiping his eyes. But why now? Why arrange this farce of a marriage? Lucia frowned, flipping through the journal. There's more here, she said. Something about the company, about secrets in its foundation. Whatever it is, I think it's why Papa suddenly wanted us together. A determined look came over David's face. Then we need to get back to the hospital. If there are more secrets, more truths to uncover, we need to hear them from him directly. As they prepared to leave, Lucia paused, her hand on the study door. David, she said, whatever happens next, whatever we discover, we're in this together now. No more secrets, no more lies. David nodded, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Together, he agreed. As it always should have been. They left the summer house, locking away the ghosts of the past but carrying with them the weight of newfound knowledge. As they drove back towards the city, towards a future now uncertain, Lucia couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The truth about their family's past had been revealed, but she sensed that even darker secrets lay ahead, waiting to be uncovered. The sky was turning a dusky purple as they approached the city limits. The hospital loomed ahead, a beacon of light in the gathering darkness. Whatever answers awaited them there, whatever challenges lay ahead, Lucia knew one thing for certain. She and David would face them as they always should have, as family. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Lucia's phone buzzed with a message. Her heart nearly stopped as she read it. David, she said, her voice trembling, it's from Sophia. Papa, he's taken a turn for the worse. The doctors, they don't think he has much time left. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever questions they had, whatever explanations they sought, time was running out. With renewed urgency, they raced into the hospital, the journal clutched tightly in Lucia's hand, its secrets burning to be revealed. Little did they know that high above them, in a private room guarded by discreet security, Alejandro Fernandez was preparing to unveil one final, earth-shattering truth. A revelation that would shake the very foundations of their world and set in motion a chain of events that neither Lucia nor David could have ever imagined. The elevator ride to the top floor of the hospital felt interminable. Lucia's heart pounded in her chest, a rhythm of fear and anticipation. Beside her, David stood rigid, his jaw clenched, knuckles white as he gripped the leather-bound journal they had discovered in the summer house. As the doors slid open, they were met by Sophia, her usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained panic. "Miss Lucia, Mr. David," she said, her voice quavering, "your father. He's asking for you." "The doctors say," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Lucia reached out, squeezing Sophia's hand. "It's okay, Sophia, we're here now." They followed her down the sterile hallway, the beeping of machines and hushed whispers of medical staff creating an eerie backdrop to their approach. Outside Alejandro's room stood two burly security guards, their presence a stark reminder of the power and influence the Fernandez name still commanded. As they entered the room, Lucia's breath caught in her throat. Alejandro lay propped up in bed, a maze of tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. But it was his eyes that struck her most. They burned with an intensity she had never seen before, as if all the fire and determination of his life had been concentrated into these final moments. "Lucia, David," Alejandro said, his voice weak but urgent. "You've been to the summer house. You've read the journal." It wasn't a question. Lucia nodded, moving to her father's bedside. "Yes, Papa. We know everything." A bitter laugh escaped Alejandro's lips, turning into a hacking cough. "Not everything, my dear. Not even close." David stepped forward, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "What more could there possibly be? You separated us, lied to us our entire lives. What else have you been hiding?" Alejandro's eyes flickered to the door, then back to his children. "The truth," he wheezed, "about Fernandez Industries. About its real foundation." Lucia frowned. "What do you mean, Papa? You built the company from nothing, that's what you always told me." "A lie," Alejandro spat out. "Like so much else. The company, it was built on blood money. On secrets that could topple governments." David and Lucia exchanged shocked glances. "What are you saying?" David demanded. Alejandro struggled to sit up straighter, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "In the early days, when I was desperate to make the company succeed, I made a deal. With men who operated in the shadows, who offered money and connections in exchange for services." "What kind of services?" Lucia asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Information," Alejandro said. "Industrial secrets, political leverage, anything that could be used to manipulate markets and sway power. I told myself it was just business, that the end justified the means. But over time, I realized I had become a puppet to forces far beyond my control." David's face had turned ashen. "The merger with Montero Industries, is that part of this too?" Alejandro nodded weakly. "Roberto, he's in deep with them too. The merger was their idea. A way to consolidate their hold, to create an empire that could influence global markets at will." "But what does this have to do with us?" Lucia asked, her mind reeling from these revelations. "Why arrange our marriage?" A look of deep shame crossed Alejandro's face. "Because I wanted out. I thought if I could unite our families, create a power base strong enough to rival theirs, we could break free. But I underestimated their reach, their ruthlessness." As if on cue, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Shouting, the sound of a scuffle. The door burst open, and Roberto Montero strode in, flanked by men in dark suits. "Alejandro, you fool," Roberto snarled. "What have you done?" Lucia instinctively moved to shield her father, while David positioned himself between them and the intruders. "What's going on here?" David demanded. Roberto's eyes darted between David and Lucia, a mixture of anger and something else. Was it fear? In his gaze, "You've told them, haven't you?" he said to Alejandro. "You've doomed us all." Alejandro struggled to sit up, his face contorted with effort. "It's over, Roberto. No more lies, no more manipulation. Our children deserve to know the truth." "The truth?" Roberto laughed bitterly. "The truth is, we're all in too deep. There's no getting out now." One of the men in suits stepped forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Lucia's heart leapt into her throat, certain he was about to draw a weapon. But instead, he produced a sleek tablet. "Mr. Fernandez, Mr. Montero," the man said, his voice eerily calm, "my employers are most displeased with this situation. They believe it's time for a change in management." He tapped the tablet's screen, and suddenly the room's TV flickered to life. On it appeared a figure shrouded in shadow, their features indistinguishable. "Alejandro, Roberto," the figure spoke, their voice distorted. "Your petty squabbles and misguided attempts at redemption have become a liability. It's time for the next generation to take control." The shadowy figure's gaze seemed to penetrate the screen, focusing on Lucia and David. "You two have been groomed for this moment your entire lives, whether you knew it or not. The skills you've acquired, the connections you've made, all part of a grand design." Lucia felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about? We don't want any part of this." "My dear," the figure said, a note of amusement in their distorted voice, "you don't have a choice. You're already part of it. The question is, will you embrace your destiny, or will you share your father's fate?" David stepped forward, his fists clenched. "And what fate is that?" The figure chuckled, a sound that sent shivers through everyone in the room. "Why don't you ask them yourself?" With that, the screen went black. In the silence that followed, Lucia turned to her father, only to find him slumped in his bed, eyes closed, the steady beep of his heart monitor replaced by a single, continuous tone. "Papa," she cried, rushing to his side. But it was too late. Alejandro Fernandez, the man who had shaped her entire world, was gone. As chaos erupted around them, doctors rushing in, alarms blaring, Lucia felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see David, his face a mixture of grief and determination. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now." Lucia hesitated, torn between staying with her father and the growing realization that they were in grave danger. "But Papa is beyond our help now," David finished softly. "But we're not. Come on." Taking one last look at Alejandro's still form, Lucia allowed David to lead her out of the room. They pushed past the confused security guards and medical staff, racing down the hallway towards the emergency stairs. As they burst into the stairwell, the sound of pursuing footsteps echoed above and below them. "Where are we going?" Lucia gasped as they descended flight after flight. "Somewhere they won't expect," David replied, his mind racing. "Somewhere we can regroup and figure out our next move." They emerged into the hospital's underground parking garage, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows as they weaved between parked cars. David led them to a nondescript sedan, quickly hotwiring it with a skill Lucia didn't know he possessed. As they peeled out of the garage, tires squealing, Lucia caught a glimpse of suited men emerging from the elevator, their shouts fading as the car accelerated into the night. For hours, they drove in tense silence, the city giving way to suburbs, then to rolling countryside. Lucia's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: grief for her father, fear of the unknown forces pursuing them, and a growing anger at the realization that her entire life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. Finally, as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, David turned off the main road onto a dirt track that wound its way up a densely forested hill. "Where are we?" Lucia asked, breaking the silence for the first time in hours. David's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "A place I hoped I'd never have to use. A safe house Roberto set up years ago, off the grid and untraceable." As they crested the hill, a small, rustic cabin came into view. It looked unremarkable, the kind of place weekend hikers might use as a base for exploring the wilderness. But Lucia suspected its ordinary appearance masked hidden security measures and escape routes. They entered cautiously, David checking every room before allowing Lucia to come inside. The interior was sparse but comfortable, a living area with a fireplace, a small kitchenette, and 2 bedrooms. As the adrenaline of their escape began to wear off, the full weight of everything that had happened crashed down on Lucia. She sank onto the worn sofa, her body shaking with silent sobs. David stood awkwardly for a moment before sitting beside her, placing a tentative arm around her shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Lucia," he said softly. "About father, about all of this." Lucia leaned into him, finding comfort in the embrace of the brother she had only just discovered. "What are we going to do, David? Who were those people? What do they want with us?" David sighed heavily. "I don't know, but I promise you, we'll figure it out together. No more secrets, no more lies. From now on, it's you and me against the world." As the sun rose fully, bathing the cabin in warm light, Lucia and David began to plan their next move. They knew that somewhere out there, powerful forces were mobilizing against them. The shadowy organization that had pulled their family's strings for decades would not let them go easily. But they also knew that they possessed something their enemies didn't expect: the truth about their past, and the unbreakable bond of siblings reunited against all odds. As Lucia looked at David, she felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dark secrets still lurked in the shadows of their family's history, they would face them together. Little did they know that their journey was just beginning. The revelations that awaited them would shake the very foundations of their world, testing their newfound bond and forcing them to confront the darkest corners of their own souls. For in the intricate web of lies and power that surrounded the Fernandez and Montero empires, Lucia and David were about to discover that they were not just pawns in a larger game. They were the key to unraveling a conspiracy that stretched back generations. A conspiracy that could reshape the very fabric of society itself. As the morning wore on, Lucia and David took stock of their situation. The cabin, while rudimentary, was well stocked with non-perishable food, first aid supplies, and even a cache of weapons hidden behind a false panel in the bedroom closet. "Roberto always was paranoid," David muttered as he examined the guns. "Never thought I'd be grateful for it." Lucia, meanwhile, had been poring over their father's journal, searching for any clues that might help them understand the forces they were up against. "David," she called, her voice tight with excitement and fear, "I think I found something." He joined her at the small kitchen table, leaning over her shoulder to read the passage she was pointing to. "The consortium," Lucia read aloud, "that's what they call themselves. A shadow organization with tentacles in every major industry, every corridor of power. They offered me a choice when I was young and desperate: join them or be crushed. I chose to join, convincing myself I could change things from the inside. Now I realize the true cost of that decision." David's brow furrowed. "The consortium. I've heard whispers of something like that in some of the more discreet business circles. But I always thought it was just a myth, a boogeyman executives used to scare each other." "Well, it's real," Lucia said grimly. "And according to this, they've been grooming us to take over the family businesses for years. But why? What's their endgame?" Before David could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the forest outside. Both of them froze, eyes wide. "Was that?" Lucia began. "A gunshot," David finished, already moving towards the weapons cache. "They've found us." Lucia's heart raced as she helped David barricade the doors and windows. As they worked, a thought struck her. "David," she whispered, "how did you know about this place? You said Roberto set it up, but..." David's face was grim as he checked the ammunition in a sleek pistol. "Because I've used it before. There's a lot I haven't told you, Lucia. About the things I've done, the people I've worked with." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Lucia could hear voices in the distance, the sound of branches breaking underfoot. "Well," she said, hefting a shotgun with trembling hands, "I guess we'll have plenty of time to exchange life stories if we make it out of this alive." As their pursuers closed in, Lucia and David exchanged a look of determination. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy they barely understood. But they had one advantage: each other. Whatever secrets still lay hidden, whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. For in the span of a few chaotic days, they had gone from strangers to siblings to partners in a fight for survival. As the first shadowy figures emerged from the tree line, Lucia took a deep breath. This was just the beginning of their story, she realized. A story of family, of betrayal, of dark secrets and unexpected alliances. And as she raised her weapon, preparing to fight for her life and her newfound brother, Lucia couldn't help but wonder. What other earth-shattering revelations awaited them in the days to come? And would they be strong enough to face the truth, no matter how dark it might be? The stage was set for a battle that would determine not just their fate, but potentially the fate of nations. And as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Lucia and David prepared to make their stand. Against the consortium, against their family's dark legacy, and against a world that had lied to them their entire lives. The real story, it seemed, was only just beginning. The forest erupted in a cacophony of gunfire and splintering wood. Lucia ducked behind an overturned table, her heart pounding in her ears. Beside her, David returned fire with practiced precision, his face a mask of grim determination. "We can't stay here," he shouted over the din. "There's a tunnel in the basement. It leads to a cave system. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." Lucia nodded, gripping her shotgun tightly. "Cover me." As David laid down suppressing fire, Lucia scrambled towards the hidden trapdoor in the kitchen floor. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, adrenaline making her clumsy. Finally, it gave way, revealing a dark passage below. "David, now," she called. He backed towards her, still firing. As soon as he was close enough, Lucia grabbed his arm and pulled him down into the tunnel. They slammed the trapdoor shut just as their pursuers burst into the cabin. The tunnel was pitch black and narrow, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. The sounds of the search above grew fainter as they pushed deeper into the earth. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the passage widened, allowing them to stand. David flicked on a small flashlight, illuminating a vast underground cavern. The beam caught glimpses of underground streams and bizarre rock formations. But it was what lay at the center of the cave that made Lucia gasp. A sleek, state-of-the-art computer setup hummed quietly, surrounded by crates of supplies and what looked like communications equipment. "What is this place?" Lucia whispered, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. David's face was grim. "Roberto's insurance policy. A command center, off the grid and untraceable. From here, we can access information on the consortium, maybe even find a way to fight back." As they approached the computers, a soft beep emanated from one of the screens. A message flashed across it. "DNA recognition confirmed. Welcome, David Montero and Lucia Fernandez." Lucia turned to David, her eyes wide. "It knew we were coming?" David shook his head, looking as confused as she felt. "I don't understand. This system wasn't even active when I last knew about this place." The screen flickered and a video began to play. Lucia's breath caught in her throat as Roberto Montero's face appeared, looking older and more haggard than when they had last seen him. "David, Lucia," Roberto's recorded image said, "if you're seeing this, then things have gone very wrong. The consortium has made its move, and Alejandro and I are likely already dead or worse." Lucia felt David tense beside her at the mention of his adoptive father. Roberto continued, his voice heavy with regret. "There's so much I need to tell you, so much you need to understand. The consortium isn't just a business alliance or a secret society. It's much, much more." The video cut to images of ancient artifacts, mysterious symbols, and what looked like scientific experiments. "The consortium's roots go back thousands of years," Roberto explained. "They've shaped human history from the shadows, guiding our development, our evolution. But their ultimate goal? To transcend humanity itself." Lucia and David exchanged shocked glances as Roberto went on to describe an unbelievable tale of advanced technology, genetic manipulation, and a plan to create a new breed of human. One that could survive the coming global catastrophes the consortium had foreseen. "Your parents, your real parents," Roberto said, looking directly at the camera, "were part of the consortium's early experiments. You, David and Lucia, are the result. You have abilities you haven't even begun to tap into. Abilities that make you the key to either the consortium's success, or its downfall. The video ended abruptly, leaving Lucia and David in stunned silence. The implications of what they had just learned were staggering. They weren't just the children of powerful businessmen, they were the products of a centuries-old conspiracy that threatened to reshape humanity itself. "This is insane," Lucia whispered, her mind reeling. "How can any of this be true?" David's face was a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, and a hint of something else. Fear? Excitement? "I don't know," he said slowly. "But it would explain some things. The way we've always been able to pick up new skills so quickly, our intuition in business dealings. Our instant connection, even when we thought we were strangers," Lucia added softly. Before they could discuss further, an alarm blared from one of the computer screens. A map of the cave system appeared, showing multiple red dots converging on their location. "They've found us," David said, already moving to gather supplies. "We need to move, now." Lucia nodded, pushing aside her shock and confusion. There would be time to process everything later. For now, survival was all that mattered. As they prepared to flee deeper into the cave system, Lucia caught sight of her reflection in one of the dark computer screens. For a moment, she could have sworn her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. She blinked, and it was gone. "Lucia, come on," David called from the tunnel entrance. Taking a deep breath, Lucia turned away from the computers and followed her brother into the darkness. Whatever the truth about their origins, whatever powers they might possess, one thing was clear: their lives would never be the same. They navigated the twisting tunnels, David's seemingly innate sense of direction guiding them through the labyrinth. As they moved, Lucia's mind raced, trying to reconcile the life she had known with the incredible revelations they had just received. "David," she whispered as they paused at a junction, "if what Roberto said is true, if we really have these abilities, why haven't we noticed before?" David's face was illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent fungi on the cave walls, giving him an almost ethereal appearance. "Maybe we have, in small ways. Think about it, Lucia. How many times have you known exactly what a business rival was thinking? How often have your hunches about market trends been eerily accurate?" Lucia's eyes widened as memories flooded back. Moments of inexplicable insight, feats of endurance or skill that had seemed just a bit too easy. "But that doesn't mean we're some kind of, what, superhumans?" A wry smile crossed David's face. "I don't know about super, but we're definitely not ordinary. And right now, that might be the only advantage we have." As if to punctuate his words, a distant rumble echoed through the caves. The sound of pursuit was growing closer. They pushed on, the tunnels gradually sloping upward. Just as Lucia's legs were beginning to burn from the exertion, they emerged into a moonlit forest clearing. The night air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the musty caverns they had left behind. "Where are we?" Lucia asked, drinking in the sight of stars twinkling between the treetops. David consulted a small device he had taken from the underground command center. "About 20 miles from where we started. There should be a road nearby. If we can find transportation, we might have a chance to." His words were cut off by the sound of a helicopter approaching. Searchlights cut through the trees, sweeping the forest floor. "Run!" David shouted, grabbing Lucia's hand. They tore through the underbrush, branches whipping at their faces. The helicopter grew louder, joined by the sound of voices and dogs barking. The consortium's forces were closing in. Just as it seemed their luck had run out, Lucia spotted a glint of metal through the trees. "David, look!" A sleek motorcycle stood partially hidden behind a large oak, as if waiting just for them. David's eyes widened in recognition. "It's one of Roberto's emergency vehicles. It must be keyed to our DNA." As they approached, the bike hummed to life, its engine a soft purr that spoke of incredible power. They climbed on, Lucia wrapping her arms tightly around David's waist. "Hold on," he said, gunning the engine. The motorcycle shot forward with incredible speed, weaving between trees with an agility that seemed almost impossible. Behind them, shouts of frustration echoed as their pursuers realized their quarry had slipped away once again. As they hit the main road, Lucia allowed herself a moment of relief. But she knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The consortium would not give up easily, and the secrets of their past, of their very nature, were still shrouded in mystery. "Where are we going?" she called over the rush of wind. David's voice was filled with grim determination. "To find answers, and to learn exactly what we're capable of." As the motorcycle ate up the miles, carrying them towards an uncertain future, Lucia felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Their world had been turned upside down, their identities thrown into question. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Little did they know that their journey was about to take them to places they could never have imagined. For the secrets of the consortium ran deeper than they knew, and the truth about their own nature was more extraordinary, and more dangerous, than they could possibly have guessed. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Lucia and David rode on, two figures against the vastness of an uncertain world. Behind them lay the shattered remains of their old lives. Ahead, a future filled with danger, discovery, and the tantalizing promise of unlocking the incredible potential that lay dormant within them. The road stretched out before them, a ribbon of possibility leading to the heart of a mystery as old as humanity itself. And as they rode, both siblings knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Miles away, in a sleek, underground facility that hummed with advanced technology, a group of figures gathered around a holographic display. The image showed two DNA strands, twisting and unraveling in a hypnotic dance. "They've escaped," one figure said, its voice distorted by an elaborate mask. Another, taller figure stepped forward, its features hidden in shadow. "Good," it said, a note of satisfaction in its androgynous voice. "Everything is proceeding as planned. Let them run. Let them discover their abilities. When the time comes, they will return to us of their own accord." "And if they don't?" a third figure asked. The tall figure turned, its eyes gleaming with an inhuman light. "Then we will show them the true meaning of power. After all, every experiment needs a control group." As the sun rose on a new day, the pieces of a cosmic chess game began to move. Lucia and David, unknowing pawns turned potential queens, raced towards their destiny. And behind them, in the shadows of history and the cutting edge of science, forces beyond their comprehension prepared for the next phase of a plan millennia in the making. The true nature of the consortium, the full extent of Lucia and David's abilities, and the ultimate fate of humanity itself all hung in the balance. And as the new day dawned, one thing was certain: the world would never be the same again. Lucia's mind was a whirlwind of questions and possibilities as they sped down the empty highway. The revelations of the past few hours had shaken her to her core, forcing her to question everything she thought she knew about herself and her family. "David," she called over the rush of wind, "where exactly are we going?" Her brother's voice was tight with concentration as he navigated a sharp turn. "There's a place Roberto told me about once, when he'd had too much to drink. A hidden research facility where the consortium supposedly conducted some of their most advanced experiments. If we can find it, we might be able to learn more about what was done to us, and what we're truly capable of." As if in response to his words, Lucia felt a strange tingling sensation in her fingertips. She looked down and gasped. Tiny arcs of electricity danced between her fingers, casting a soft blue glow in the pre-dawn light. "David," she cried, equal parts terrified and amazed. He glanced back, his eyes widening at the sight. "It's starting," he muttered. "Our abilities are awakening." Before Lucia could respond, a sleek black car appeared on the road behind them, gaining quickly. The tinted windows rolled down, revealing men in dark suits aiming what looked like highly advanced weapons. "Hold on," David shouted, pushing the motorcycle to its limits. What followed was a chase straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. The motorcycle wove through traffic that seemed to appear out of nowhere, while their pursuers fired strange energy weapons that left scorch marks on the asphalt. As they approached a busy intersection, Lucia felt a surge of something coursing through her body. Without thinking, she raised her hand towards the traffic lights ahead. To her amazement, every light turned green in their favor, while the crossing traffic screeched to a halt. David let out a whoop of exhilaration as they shot through the intersection unscathed, leaving their pursuers trapped behind a wall of honking cars. "How did you do that?" he asked, awe evident in his voice. Lucia stared at her hand, still tingling with residual energy. I don't know. I just felt like I could, and then it happened." As the adrenaline of the chase faded, Lucia became aware of a new sensation, a sort of sixth sense that seemed to connect her to the electronic devices around them. She could feel the pulse of cell phones in nearby cars, the hum of power lines overhead. "David," she said slowly, "I think I can interact with technology somehow. It's like I can feel the flow of electricity, of data." David nodded, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "And I think I can read people's intentions. Back there, during the chase, I knew exactly what our pursuers were going to do before they did it." The implications of these newfound abilities were staggering. If they could learn to control and develop these powers, they might stand a chance against the vast resources of the consortium. As the sun finally crested the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, David guided the motorcycle off the main road and onto a narrow, unmarked track that led into a dense forest. "We're close," he said as they wound their way through the trees. "The facility should be just ahead." Suddenly, the forest gave way to a large clearing. In the center stood a nondescript concrete building, its walls covered in creeping vines. To the casual observer, it might have looked like an abandoned warehouse or Cold War-era bunker. But Lucia's newfound senses told her otherwise. "It's active," she whispered. "I can feel the power running through it, the data flowing in and out. This place is anything but abandoned." They approached cautiously, parking the motorcycle in a secluded spot and proceeding on foot. As they neared the building's single visible entrance, Lucia placed her hand on the keypad lock. She closed her eyes, concentrating on the flow of electrons, the patterns of data. With a soft beep, the door slid open. "Impressive," David said with a grin. "Shall we see what secrets this place holds?" Lucia nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As they stepped into the facility, lights flickered to life, illuminating a space that looked like a cross between a high-tech laboratory and a museum of ancient artifacts. Display cases held strange devices and cryptic symbols, while advanced computer terminals lined the walls. At the center of the room stood a large cylindrical chamber, filled with a softly glowing liquid. "What is this place?" Lucia breathed, taking in the bizarre juxtaposition of cutting-edge technology and archaic mysticism. Before David could respond, a holographic image flickered to life in front of them. It was Roberto Montero again, but this time he looked younger, more vital. "If you're seeing this," the hologram said, "then you've taken the first step towards understanding your true nature and the role you're destined to play. Welcome, David and Lucia, to Project Prometheus, the birthplace of a new humanity." As Roberto's hologram began to explain the true history of the consortium and the experiments that had led to their creation, Lucia and David exchanged a look of determination. Whatever revelations awaited them, whatever challenges they would face them together. For in unlocking the secrets of their past, they held the key to humanity's future. And as the hologram spoke of ancient prophecies and cutting-edge science, of global conspiracies and cosmic destinies, one thing became clear. Their story was no longer just about two siblings uncovering family secrets. It was about the very fate of human evolution itself. The real adventure, it seemed, was only just beginning. As Roberto's hologram continued its revelations, Lucia and David found themselves immersed in a tale that spanned millennia. The consortium, it turned out, was far older and more powerful than they had imagined. For thousands of years, Roberto's image explained, the consortium has guided human development from the shadows. From the building of the pyramids to the Industrial Revolution, from world wars to technological breakthroughs, all have been steps in a grand plan. Images flashed around them, ancient artifacts, medieval manuscripts, modern laboratories. Each told a piece of a story that was almost too vast to comprehend. "But why?" Lucia asked, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. "What's the ultimate goal?" The hologram seemed to look directly at her as it answered. "Survival. The consortium's leaders have long known that humanity faces extinction, climate change, resource depletion, cosmic events beyond our control. Project Prometheus is the answer. A way to evolve humanity into something that can survive whatever the future holds. David's eyes narrowed. And we're part of this project? Some kind of advanced humans? Roberto's image nodded. You are the culmination of generations of careful genetic manipulation and technological enhancement. Your abilities are just the tip of the iceberg. With proper training, you could become more than human, the progenitors of a new species. Lucia felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were staggering. But we never asked for this, she said. You can't just decide the fate of humanity without consent. A valid moral argument, the hologram conceded. But one that becomes moot in the face of extinction. The consortium believes the end justifies the means. As the hologram faded, leaving them alone in the vast laboratory, Lucia turned to David. What do we do now? We can't let the consortium reshape humanity on a whim, but if what they're saying about the threats we face is true. David's face was a mask of determination. We learn, we train, we master these abilities we've been given, and then we make our own choice about how to use them. Lucia nodded, a spark of excitement cutting through her fear. Where do we start? As if in answer, the cylindrical chamber at the center of the room hummed to life. The glowing liquid inside began to swirl, forming patterns and images. I think, David said with a wry smile, our training program has just begun. Over the next few hours, Lucia and David immersed themselves in the knowledge and training programs left behind by the consortium. They discovered abilities they never dreamed possible. Lucia's power to manipulate electronic systems expanded to control over all forms of energy, while David's empathic abilities grew to include telekinesis and enhanced physical prowess. As they trained, they also learned more about the world they had unwittingly been part of their entire lives. The consortium's influence was vast, touching every aspect of global society. But they also discovered dissent within the ranks, those who believed the consortium had lost its way, forsaking its duty as humanity's shepherd for the pursuit of power. We could be the key, Lucia realized as they took a break from their intense training session. With our abilities, we could expose the consortium, maybe even reform it from within. David nodded, his eyes gleaming with newfound purpose. Or we could chart a new course entirely. Use what we've learned to prepare humanity for the challenges ahead, but on our own terms. Their discussion was interrupted by a blaring alarm. Security screens flickered to life, showing a small army of consortium forces converging on the facility. They've found us, David said, already moving towards the exit. But Lucia stood her ground, a plan forming in her mind. No, she said, her voice filled with a confidence she'd never felt before. We're done running. It's time we faced them head on. David looked at her in surprise, then slowly nodded. You're right. Whatever happens next, we face it together. As the first explosions rocked the outer doors of the facility, Lucia and David stood side by side, their bodies humming with newfound power and purpose. They were no longer the pawns in someone else's game. They were players in their own right, ready to reshape the board entirely. The doors burst open, and a flood of armed men poured in, led by a figure Lucia and David recognized all too well, the shadowy leader they had seen in the hospital, now stepping into the light for the first time. Welcome, children, the figure said, its voice a blend of menace and pride. I see you've discovered your heritage. Now, it's time for you to take your rightful place in the New World Order. Lucia and David exchanged a look, years of unspoken understanding passing between them in an instant. Then, as one, they turned to face their would-be masters. I'm afraid, Lucia said, her voice ringing with power, you've got it all wrong. We're not here to join you. David continued, his eyes glowing with an inner light. We're here to stop you. The air crackled with energy as Lucia and David unleashed their newfound abilities. The consortium forces, for all their advanced technology, found themselves outmatched by the very beings they had helped create. As the battle raged, Lucia and David realized that this was just the beginning. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and they were now at the center of a conflict that would determine the course of human evolution. But as they fought side by side, their powers complementing each other in perfect synchronicity, they felt a sense of rightness, of destiny fulfilled. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, not as the puppets of some ancient conspiracy, but as the architects of their own fate. The story of the millionaire's daughter and her long-lost brother had transformed into something far greater, a tale of human potential, of the power of choice, and of the unbreakable bond of family in the face of cosmic challenges. As the dust settled and the last of the consortium forces fell, Lucia and David stood victorious, the future stretching out before them like an unwritten book. "What now?" Lucia asked, surveying the destruction around them. David smiled, taking her hand. "Now, dear sister, we change the world." And as they stepped out of the facility and into the light of a new day, Lucia and David knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. The world awaited, full of challenges and wonders beyond imagination. But together, they were ready to face whatever came next. The end of one chapter, it seemed, was just the beginning of an even greater story. The world was not prepared for Lucia and David. In the months following their confrontation with the consortium, the siblings had become a force to be reckoned with. Their story, a tale of secret societies, genetic manipulation, and long-lost family, had captivated the global media. But it was their crusade against corruption and their push for technological and social progress that truly shook the foundations of society. Lucia, with her ability to manipulate energy and interface with technology, had become a beacon of hope in the fight against climate change. She spearheaded projects to develop clean, limitless energy sources, working tirelessly to undo the environmental damage wrought by decades of industrial excess. David, with his enhanced empathic abilities and physical prowess, had turned his attention to social justice and conflict resolution. His uncanny ability to understand and mediate even the most entrenched disputes had brought peace to war-torn regions and bridged seemingly insurmountable ideological divides. Together, they were reshaping the world at a pace that left many struggling to keep up. But not everyone was celebrating their meteoric rise. On a crisp autumn morning, Lucia stood at the window of their new headquarters, a sleek, eco-friendly skyscraper in the heart of New York City. The view of the city skyline was breathtaking, but her mind was elsewhere. "You're worried," David said, not a question but a statement of fact as he joined her at the window. Lucia nodded, her reflection in the glass showing the concern etched on her face. "We're moving too fast, David. The world isn't ready for all this change. We're upsetting the balance of power, and the pushback is getting stronger every day." David placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. But we can't slow down now. The threats the consortium warned about, climate disaster, resource depletion, they're all too real. We have to keep pushing forward." Before Lucia could respond, an alarm blared through the building. Holographic screens materialized around them, showing news feeds from around the world. "Breaking news," an anchor announced, her voice tense. "In a coordinated attack, energy facilities and data centers across the globe have been hit by a series of mysterious electromagnetic pulses. Early reports suggest this may be a direct challenge to the Fernandez-Montero initiatives." Lucia's eyes widened in shock. "It's them, the remnants of the consortium. They're making their move." David was already moving, his body tensing for action. "We need to contain this. If those EMPs spread, they could set us back years." As they rushed to their command center, Lucia couldn't shake a nagging feeling that they had overlooked something crucial. The attack was too well coordinated, too precisely targeted. It was as if their opponents knew exactly where to hit them. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Lucia worked tirelessly to counter the electromagnetic attacks, using her powers to stabilize power grids and protect vital data networks. David coordinated their global response teams, his enhanced mind processing information at an incredible speed. But as they fought to contain the crisis, a more insidious threat was unfolding behind the scenes. In the depths of cyberspace, a figure known only as the Architect watched the chaos unfold with cold satisfaction. Lines of code flowed around them, a digital representation of the very fabric of the global network. "They're distracted," the Architect mused, their voice a synthetic blend of tones. "Initiate Phase 2. Across the world, sleeper agents embedded in key positions began to act. In government offices, corporate boardrooms, and military installations, carefully placed individuals executed long-laid plans. The goal was not just to disrupt Lucia and David's initiatives, but to turn public opinion against them. Back at their headquarters, Lucia and David were finally gaining the upper hand against the EMP attacks when a new crisis emerged. David, Lucia, their chief of staff, a brilliant woman named Amara, burst into the command center. "You need to see this." New holoscreens flickered to life, showing protests erupting in cities around the world. The crowds carried signs with slogans like, "Stop the superhuman takeover," and "Say number to genetic elitism." "What's going on?" Lucia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara's face was grim. "Someone's leaked documents, real or fabricated, we're not sure yet, claiming that your powers aren't unique. That you've been secretly enhancing a select group of individuals, creating a superhuman elite to rule over the rest of humanity." David's fists clenched. "That's ridiculous. We've been transparent about our abilities from the start. Everything we've done has been to benefit all of humanity." "It doesn't matter," Amara said, shaking her head. "The story is spreading like wildfire. People are scared. They're saying you're no better than the consortium, just with better PR." Lucia felt as if the floor was dropping out from under her. All their work, all their sacrifices, was it all about to come crashing down? As if to answer her unspoken question, a new alert sounded. A video call was coming in from an unexpected source, the United Nations Security Council. With a sense of foreboding, Lucia accepted the call. The stern faces of world leaders filled the screen. "Ms. Fernandez, Mr. Montero," the Secretary General began, her voice cold. "In light of recent events and the growing unrest, the Security Council has made a decision. We are hereby requesting that you cease all operations and turn yourselves in for questioning. Your powers, while used for good intentions, represent a threat to global security that we can no longer ignore." The siblings exchanged a look of disbelief. How had things unraveled so quickly? But before they could respond, the building shook with a massive explosion. Warning sirens blared as smoke began to fill the command center. "We're under attack," Amara shouted over the din. "Multiple hostiles, heavily armed. They've breached the lower levels." In that moment, as alarms wailed and the world seemed to be turning against them, Lucia and David faced a cruel reality. Their powers, which they had thought would save humanity, had instead made them targets. The very people they had sworn to protect now viewed them as a threat. As they prepared to defend themselves against the oncoming assault, a chilling thought occurred to Lucia. What if the consortium had been right all along? What if humanity wasn't ready for the next step in evolution? But there was no time for doubt. As the first explosions rocked the building's foundations, Lucia and David stood back to back, their powers humming to life. "Whatever happens," David said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "we face it together." Lucia nodded, energy crackling at her fingertips. "Together," she agreed. As the smoke cleared and the first wave of attackers burst through the doors, Lucia and David launched into action. But even as they fought, they knew that the real battle, the battle for the hearts and minds of humanity, was only just beginning. In the shadows, forgotten by almost everyone, the remnants of the old consortium watched and waited. For them, this chaos was not a setback, but an opportunity. The stage was being set for the next phase of their millennia-old plan. And as Lucia and David fought for their lives and their vision of the future, they remained unaware that the greatest threat, and perhaps their only hope for redemption, was yet to reveal itself. The world was changing, faster than anyone could have predicted. And in the crucible of conflict, the true nature of Lucia and David's destiny was about to be forged. As the battle raged on, Lucia and David found themselves pushed to the limits of their extraordinary abilities. The attackers, clearly well-trained and equipped with advanced technology, seemed to have countermeasures for every move the siblings made. They knew exactly how to fight us, David grunted as he deflected a barrage of energy blasts. "This isn't just some random assault." Lucia nodded grimly, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air as she manipulated the building's systems to their advantage. "Someone's been studying us, planning this for a long time. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, a familiar voice crackled over their communication systems. Lucia, David, can you hear me? It was Sophia, their old housekeeper and one of the few people they still trusted implicitly. Sophia? Lucia gasped, barely dodging a volley of projectiles. How did you? No time to explain, Sophia cut her off. There's a hidden escape route in the sub-basement. Your father, Alejandro, had it built years ago. I'm sending you the access codes now. As the information flooded into Lucia's mind, courtesy of her technopathic abilities, she grabbed David's arm. We need to go, now. With a synchronized burst of power, they cleared a path through their attackers and made a break for the emergency stairwell. As they descended, the sounds of battle above them grew fainter, replaced by an eerie silence. The sub-basement was a maze of dimly lit corridors and abandoned storage rooms. Following Sophia's directions, they found themselves facing what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. Here, Lucia said, placing her hand on a seemingly random spot. The wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing a narrow passage beyond. As they stepped through, the wall rematerialized behind them, cutting off the sounds of approaching pursuers. The passage led them to a small, high-tech vehicle bay where a sleek, pod-like craft awaited. I don't believe it, David muttered as they clambered inside. This thing looks like it could travel underwater or even fly, Lucia finished, her hands dancing over the controls. Hang on. The pod hummed to life, lifting off the ground and accelerating down a long tunnel. Within moments, they burst out of a hidden exit and into the open sky above New York Harbor. As the city receded behind them, both siblings let out a breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Where do we go now? David asked, the weight of their situation settling over him. The whole world thinks we're the enemy. Lucia's face was set in determination. We find the truth. Someone set us up, turned the world against us. We need to know who and why. As if in answer to her words, the POD's communication system crackled to life. A distorted voice, one they didn't recognize, came through. If you want answers, come to where it all began. The truth awaits you at the source. The coordinates that followed pointed to a location that made both Lucia and David's blood run cold. The old Fernandez summer house, where their mother had died and their lives had been forever altered. It's a trap, David said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Lucia nodded, almost certainly, but it's also our only lead. As they set course for the place where their journey had begun, both siblings knew they were flying into the unknown. The world they had tried to save now hunted them, and the lines between ally and enemy had never been more blurred. But amidst the uncertainty and danger, one thing remained clear: they had each other. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, uncover the truth behind their existence, and find a way to set things right. As the pod streaked across the sky, carrying them towards their uncertain destiny, Lucia and David prepared themselves for the greatest test of their lives. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the true nature of their role in the grand cosmic drama was about to be revealed. Little did they know that their arrival at the summer house would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of reality itself. The old Fernandez summer house loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. As Lucia guided their craft to a landing in the overgrown garden, memories of their last visit flooded back, the revelations, the danger, the first awakening of their powers. It looks abandoned, David observed as they cautiously exited the pod. But appearances can be deceiving. Lucia nodded, her senses stretching out to scan the area. There's something here, an energy signature I've never felt before. It's coming from underground. They made their way to the house, every step filled with tension. The front door creaked open at David's touch, revealing an interior that was both familiar and alien. Dust-covered furniture and faded photographs told the story of a life long abandoned, but there was something else. A faint, pulsing glow emanating from beneath the floorboards. There, Lucia whispered, pointing to a spot in the center of the living room. Whatever's calling us, it's down there. Working together, they managed to pry up the old wooden planks, revealing a sight that took their breath away. A spiraling staircase of what looked like pure energy descended into the earth, pulsing with an otherworldly light. David and Lucia exchanged a look. There was no turning back now. As they descended the staircase, the world around them seemed to shift and warp. The walls of the tunnel glowed with strange symbols and equations, complex diagrams that seemed to depict the very fabric of reality. What is this place? Lucia breathed, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. Before David could respond, they emerged into a vast, cathedral-like chamber. At its center stood a massive device, a swirling vortex of energy contained within a framework of advanced technology unlike anything they had ever seen. And there, waiting for them, was a figure they had thought long dead, Roberto Montero. "Welcome, children," Roberto said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Welcome to the heart of Project Prometheus." David tensed, ready for a fight, but Lucia placed a calming hand on his arm. Something was different about Roberto. He seemed older, wearier, but there was a clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You're not really here, are you?" Lucia asked, her technopathic senses picking up on the subtle energy fluctuations around Roberto's form. A sad smile crossed Roberto's face. "Perceptive as always, Lucia. No, I'm not physically here. This is a message, left for you in the event that things unfolded as they have." "What is this place?" David demanded. "What's really going on?" Roberto's image gestured to the swirling vortex behind him. "This, my children, is the culmination of the consortium's work. A gateway to other realities, other timelines. We discovered that our universe is but one of infinite possibilities, each with its own version of humanity, its own path of evolution." Lucia's mind reeled at the implications. The consortium wasn't just trying to change humanity in our world. They were searching for the perfect version of humanity across all possible worlds. David finished, the pieces falling into place. Roberto nodded. "Exactly. But in doing so, we made a terrible mistake. Our meddling with the fabric of reality has created instabilities, tears in the cosmic tapestry. The attacks you faced, the turning of public opinion against you, these are just symptoms of a much larger problem." As if to emphasize his point, the chamber shuddered. In the air around them, they could see brief flashes of other realities, versions of themselves, of the world, flickering in and out of existence. "The barriers between realities are breaking down," Roberto continued, his voice urgent. "If this continues, it could lead to the collapse of not just our universe, but all universes." Lucia felt a weight settle on her shoulders. "And let me guess, we're the only ones who can stop it?" Roberto's image smiled sadly. "You are the bridge, the perfect synthesis of science and nature, of human potential and cosmic power. Only you can repair the damage we've done and restore balance to the multiverse." As Roberto's form began to fade, he left them with one final message. "The power to reshape reality itself lies within you. Use it wisely, and remember, the truest strength comes not from your abilities, but from your bond as family." With that, he was gone, leaving Lucia and David alone in the cosmic gateway chamber. For a moment, they stood in stunned silence, the weight of their newfound responsibility settling over them. Then, slowly, they turned to face each other. "So," David said, a hint of his old wry humor creeping into his voice, "save all of reality or watch everything we've ever known crumble into cosmic dust. No pressure, right?" Lucia couldn't help but laugh, the sound echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "Just another Tuesday for the Fernandez Montero siblings, I suppose." As they approached the swirling vortex, hands clasped tightly together, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had, together. As Lucia and David stood before the swirling vortex of cosmic energy, the full weight of their destiny pressed upon them. The fate of not just their world, but countless realities across the multiverse, hung in the balance. With a shared look of determination, they stepped into the unknown. The sensation was indescribable, a rush of information, emotions, and possibilities flooding their senses. They saw glimpses of alternate realities, worlds where they had never met, universes where the consortium's plans had succeeded, timelines where humanity had evolved beyond recognition. Through it all, their hands remained clasped, their bond serving as an anchor in the chaotic sea of realities. Focus, Lucia shouted over the cosmic din. We need to find the source of the instability. David nodded, his enhanced empathic abilities stretching to their limit as he sifted through the emotions of countless versions of humanity. Suddenly, he felt it, a discordant note in the cosmic symphony, a wound in the fabric of reality itself. There, he called out, guiding them towards the disturbance. As they approached, the nature of the problem became clear. The consortium's meddling had created a paradox, a knot in the timeline where cause and effect had become hopelessly tangled. At its heart, they saw versions of themselves, trapped in an endless loop of discovery and conflict. We need to untangle it, Lucia realized, her technopathic powers allowing her to see the problem as a complex, multidimensional equation. Working in perfect synchronicity, Lucia and David began to reshape the cosmic energies around them. It was like conducting an orchestra of pure creation, each movement altering the very nature of reality. As they worked, they became aware of other presences joining them, alternate versions of themselves from across the multiverse, each lending their unique abilities to the task. It was a confluence of possibility, a union of all they could have been and might yet become. Hours or eons passed. Time had little meaning in this place between worlds. Slowly but surely, the tangled knot of realities began to unknot. The paradox resolved itself, cosmic energies flowing smoothly once more. But their task was not yet complete. As the multiverse stabilized, Lucia and David realized the true nature of their role. They weren't just here to fix the damage. They were meant to be guardians, protectors of the delicate balance between realities. With their newfound understanding, they began to weave safeguards into the very fabric of the multiverse. They created cosmic fail-safes, barriers that would prevent any one reality from unduly influencing another. The consortium's dream of finding the perfect humanity was replaced with a vision of infinite diversity, each world free to find its own path. As their work neared completion, Lucia and David faced one final choice. They had the power to reshape their own reality, to undo the damage done and create a world where they had never been separated. The temptation was immense. We could have the life we were meant to have, David said softly, images of a happier childhood flashing before them. Lucia smiled sadly, squeezing his hand. But then we wouldn't be who we are now. Every struggle, every hardship, it's made us who we need to be for this moment. David nodded, understanding. With a final burst of cosmic energy, they sealed their work, accepting their past while looking towards a new future. The journey back to their own reality was like waking from a vivid dream. They found themselves back in the chamber beneath the summer house, the gateway device now dark and dormant. But they were changed, carrying within them the knowledge and power of their cosmic journey. As they emerged from the house, they found a world in chaos. The attacks, the public turmoil, it had all been a symptom of the cosmic instability they had just resolved. Now, with the multiverse back in balance, they had a chance to set things right. Over the following weeks, Lucia and David worked tirelessly to rebuild trust and explain the truth of what had happened. It wasn't easy, the world was still wary of their powers. But slowly, with transparency and a commitment to using their abilities for the greater good, they began to turn the tide of public opinion. They reformed the remnants of the consortium into a new organization dedicated to responsible scientific advancement and cosmic stewardship. The knowledge they had gained allowed them to guide humanity towards a brighter future, not by controlling it, but by empowering people to reach their own potential. Years passed, and the world flourished under this new paradigm. Lucia and David, once seen as potential threats, became respected leaders and innovators. They never married. Their bond as siblings was more profound than any romantic relationship could be. Instead, they dedicated their lives to nurturing the next generation, preparing humanity for its role in the cosmic tapestry. On a warm summer evening, much like the one where their journey had begun, Lucia and David stood on the balcony of their rebuilt family home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. "Do you ever wonder," Lucia asked, "about all those other versions of us out there? All the paths we didn't take?" David smiled, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of one who had seen the infinite. "Sometimes. But then I remember, every version of us, in every reality, is exactly where they need to be. Lucia nodded, a sense of peace washing over her. We've come a long way from that arranged marriage, haven't we? They laughed, the sound carrying on the gentle breeze. From forced marriage to cosmic guardians, their journey had been beyond anything they could have imagined. But through it all, the one constant had been their bond, as siblings, as partners, as the bridge between humanity's past and its limitless future. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Lucia and David stood in comfortable silence. They had faced unimaginable challenges, reshaped the very nature of reality, and emerged stronger for it. Whatever the future held, whatever new cosmic mysteries awaited, they would face it as they always had, together. The story of the millionaire's daughter and her long-lost brother had become legend, a tale of love, sacrifice, and the extraordinary potential that lies within every human soul. And as they gazed up at the infinite cosmos, Lucia and David knew that their greatest adventure, the never-ending journey of discovery and growth, was only just beginning. In the vast tapestry of the multiverse, their story was but a single thread. But it was a thread that shimmered with possibility, a beacon of hope for all of humanity. For in their journey, the world had learned a profound truth, that the greatest power of all comes not from cosmic forces or genetic manipulation, but from the bonds we forge with one another. And so, as the last light of day faded into night, Lucia and David stepped forward into their future, guardians of a cosmic legacy, but more importantly, family. Their saga, which had begun with a forced marriage and a shocking wedding day revelation, had blossomed into an epic tale of universal proportions. But at its heart, it remained a story of two siblings who discovered that true strength lies not in the power to reshape reality, but in the courage to face it together.